Well, hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Jeff Bastable. I graduated from the College of Arts and Sciences in 1969 and received my master's degree from the college in 1973. I'm here today in my capacity as a member of the College of Arts and Sciences Dean's Advisory Board, and I want to welcome all of you to today's Arts and Sciences Alumni Academy. The College of Arts and Sciences offers these Zoom talks as a way of letting alumni know of the great research and scholarship which is happening at the college. Today, we're pleased to present an astronomical legacy, the history of Holden Observatory, which I've toured, and take a peek at the history of the second oldest building on campus. Before we begin, we have a few housekeeping items to share with you. First, we ask everyone to mute their microphones. And of course, that will ensure that everyone can hear our presenter. We are recording this event, and it will be shared on the college's website for people to view after this evening. If you do not want your image recorded, and we are recording this meeting, please feel free to turn off your camera. Closed captioning services are provided for this event. At this time, please direct your attention to the chat for additional instructions on closed captions and a few other informational items. Right now, I'd like to introduce our speaker for this afternoon. Robert Searing is the curator of history at the Onondaga Historical Association and a master archivist from personal experience. He has a BA in history from Binghamton University and a master's degree in American history from Syracuse University. The Onondaga Historical Association oversees 5 museums in central New York, including the Onondaga Historical Museum in downtown Syracuse, which I commend to you on one of your visits to central New York. As curator, Bob is responsible for exhibit creation, publishing articles in a variety of media outlets, presentations, and regular radio and television appearances. He's very prolific. He's also an adjunct in the history department at SUNY Cortland and Tompkins Cortland Community College, and he writes a weekly column for the Syracuse Post-Standard, which is outstanding. I know we're all excited to get today's presentation, so with that, I'll turn this over to Bob. Bob, please begin your presentation.
Oh, thanks so much for that warm introduction, Jeff. It was a great surprise when I heard that you were going to be emceeing this event. Any of you folks that are in Syracuse can make your way down to Montgomery Street and see our newest exhibition on sports uniforms, and in fact might actually see Mr. Bastable's old football pants from the 1960s, and you'll have a whole new appreciation for why this team was called the Orange. I'll tell you what, you can wear those things hunting. It's something spectacular. I'm thrilled to be back. It was wonderful to be with you guys a few months back and talking about the Hall of Languages. I really had fun on this one. I spent over a decade in graduate school at Syracuse University, and like many of you, I'm sure, walked by this beautiful but curious structure many times, wondering what exactly it was. Well, we're going to learn all about that today. I'm going to go through and we're going to talk a little bit about the history of the building, its construction, its lifespan, and luckily we're going to end on a really positive note with the rebirth of this amazing structure, which, as Jeff said, was the second oldest structure on Syracuse campus. I'm going to start with a quote from Carl Sagan, who said that we are a way by which the cosmos can learn about itself. And the study of astronomy and the purpose of the Holden Observatory really speaks to this innate desire for humanity to look and learn about the world around it. Whether we're talking about the ancient Egyptians, the Phoenicians, the Greeks, the Romans, the Chinese, human beings have been looking to the stars as long as we have been upright on 2 legs. And it's through these tools that we have learned so much about it. And as Carl Sagan said, the more we learn about the cosmos, the more the cosmos learns about itself. Everything at Syracuse University starts, of course, with the Hall of Languages. SU is founded in 1871 by the Methodists outside of Lima, New York. And of course, the first building on campus is one of our most magnificent, the Hall of Language. Now, the original plan, when the trustees laid everything out in 1871, was for several buildings to have been constructed at the time. Unfortunately, and those historians in the room might know this, there was an enormous post-Civil War depression called the Panic of 1873, which essentially halted just about everything across the country, and certainly halted things in Syracuse, which is why the Hall of Languages, as beautiful as this Second Empire structure designed by Horatio Nelson White was, sat by itself on top of Piety Hill until the construction of Holden, which comes about 14 years later. And the genesis for Holden Observatory is really this gentleman here. This is Chancellor Charles Sims, of course, the namesake of Sims Hall, another beautiful building on our exquisitely pretty campus. Sims takes over from Chancellor Steele, and he's a man on a mission. Like Chancellor Day, who will succeed him in this post. He is a Methodist preacher. He is, of course, a man of God, but he is somebody, because of his love of the heavens, is really, really, really into astronomy. And it's something that he will drive home to the faculty and to the growing student body at Syracuse University when he takes over in 1881. Really, to his enduring credit, Chancellor Sims founds the building fund and really grows the endowment of the university. And in many respects, you know, it's counterfactual to say that the university might have failed, but it was really you know, teetering for a little while when he comes in, and it really is through his incredible organization. And honestly, the irony of it is he was a real spendthrift, if you will, and really got down to brass tacks when it came to budgeting. But he had a certain fundraising success, and he grew the endowment by leaps and bounds. And part of that was the building fund. And at the center of that building fund was a push to build several buildings that had been part of the original plan, which come to include Holden, the Von Ronkel Library, which we now call the Tully Administration Building, and maybe the most magnificent building on campus, Krause Memorial College. And all of these buildings were built and designed by Archimedes Russell, who we'll get to in a second. Now, this is Erastus Holden. Holden is a very wealthy industrialist in Syracuse. He's on the board of several of the railroad companies, including the Syracuse and Binghamton, but he really makes his money in the coal business. He has a Holden and Sons coal business, which is one of the larger coal concerns in Syracuse, New York. And it really is from that wealth that he will give quite a bit to Syracuse University over the course of his life. He's actually one of the trustees of the school, and he ends up giving the money after a really nice Thanksgiving meeting with Chancellor Sims. Both of the men share this affinity for astronomy and for the heavens. And Holden is really taken, particularly because he has lost his son. He has undergone a great tragedy. His son, Charles, who is a graduate of the class of 1877, and actually what you're looking at here, my friends, is his entry from the SU Alumni yearbook that was published in 1910. He doesn't live a very long life, but he really is quite a spectacular figure, and he has a lasting influence at Syracuse University beyond the fact that the Holden Observatory is named after him. He is actually one of the founding members of the university crew team. In 1875, he and one of his intrepid partners at SU actually traveled to Rochester and actually bring back a boat that is really the beginning of what is called the Syracuse Navy, which will become the Syracuse crew. And those of you that are aware of Syracuse's crew team, it might not be many of you, but Syracuse crew is one of the oldest and most prestigious crew teams in the United States. So you've got Holden really tied into both of these things. He tragically dies in 1883. He's only 30 years old. And it is from this grief and this sort of looking to the heavens, as many of us do when we lose a loved one, that Erastus decides to pony up some money to his friend Sims and real endow that. When he dies in 1899, Erastus Holden will actually leave Syracuse University $25,000 in his will. So in addition to the observatory and the money that he puts in for its upkeep and its maintenance, he also endows the university with a rather large chunk of money, which is part of that larger expansion of the endowment that Chancellor Sims should be rightly credited for. But again, this is really a testament to the grief and the love that he had for his son, who, along with his brother, was supposed to take over the business that helped fund his memorial. Now, I mentioned Archimedes Russell earlier. This is a name that some of you probably know already. There are few folks that have had as much of an influence on the built environment of the campus that we all know and love as this gentleman. Also, just the city of Syracuse in general. Incredibly prolific architect, born in Providence, ends up in Syracuse, actually is the understudy of Horatio Nelson White, who, as you might recall, actually designs the Hall of Languages. By the time he does that in 1873, Russell has actually got on his own, and he has an office in downtown Syracuse in the Larned Building, which is still extant. Those of you that are in Syracuse or that visit Syracuse can actually go down on Warren Street, and the Larned Building is still there. They cleverly repurposed it into a parking garage, but you would never know that it's a parking garage if you drive by it. It looks like the building that Archimedes Russell would have been in when he was drawing the drawings for Holden and for Krauss Memorial and for the Von Ranke. As I mentioned, he's incredibly prolific. He had over 950 commissions, those three of the great triumvirate on the campus. And also one of the great jewels in his crown is the 4th Onondaga County Courthouse, which I'm looking at out my window at the Onondaga Historical Association right now. In addition to his his architecture work, though, he is also one of the first faculty in the School of Art, the Fine Arts that is in the Hall of Languages. And again, Syracuse University has one of the oldest and most prestigious architecture schools anywhere in the United States. And one of the great joys I have as a curator of OHA is just about every year I will do walking tours for international architecture students, graduate students who are here, and sometimes graduates, undergraduate students as well. And I get to walk them around the campus, and I walk them around downtown Syracuse. And we really are blessed in this community to have so many architectural gems that really run the gambit of styles, from the Second Empire style of the Hall of Languages to the High Victorian Gothic style of Krauss Memorial, to the Beaux Arts that we've got down in the courthouse and all over. And Russell is really representative of that. Really a tremendous character, and is on the faculty for several decades before he passes away. So he has a tremendous influence. But this little building that he designs in 1887, construction begins in June. It's finished by the winter, and one of the cool things about this building is, just like the Hall of Languages, the picture that you're looking at on your left is actually an up-close picture of one of the blocks. It's constructed completely of Onondaga limestone, so you have this really interesting and I think kind of cool juxtaposition when we're thinking about the infiniteness of space, and the fact that the universe is always expanding, and we are just tiny specks of dust. Dust in the wind, I think Kansas called it back in the day. But what you've got in this building are the oldest remnants of the oldest living organisms that would have been in this area 300 to 400 million years ago during the Devonian period. And that is what you're looking at here, is an actual fossil that is in the very rock that built this building. So I love that idea that you are in this building composed of rock that is 400 million years old, as you stare into the cosmos that is infinitely expanding, as we're told. It is not a very large building. Like I said, most of us have seen it when we were students at SU. It's 36 by 40, and the turret with the movable tower is 25 feet high. And the rock itself was actually quarried almost right on the Onondaga Nation. And the great irony of this is Chancellor Sims, for all his wonderful works on the campus, actually had a very, very rough view of the Onondaga, and at one point or another called for the United States government to basically wipe them off their reservation. And that's a story for another day. But again, the complexities of this building, as you walk by it, you would never necessarily know that you have this juxtaposition of the man responsible for its construction, the stone quarried right on the nation, and that sort of legacy of what he was calling for in the 1890s. But nonetheless, the students called this Science Hill, and they were well aware of the fossilized record that is in the building, and it was it was a sort of a wonderful day for the students at Syracuse University in 1887. Chancellor Sims canceled classes. They were getting drunk. They were putting away some beers, according to some records that I found in the archives up at SU Special Collections. They were toasting. I want to get this right. They were toasting, and they would bang their cups on the thing. Here's to E.F. Holden, drink her down. And they would throw one back. I would imagine probably one of the fine German lagers made just up on the north side of Syracuse here. But what you're looking at here, my friends, is actually the dedication program from the dedication day, December 18th, 1887. It's not the greatest quality, but inside there were several hymns, because remember, Syracuse is founded by Methodists, and so everything is couched in religious terms. They called it Piety Hill, and then there on Piety Hill you had Science Hill. And so again, the students were loving it. They really took the construction of this building as a sign of the progress of their institution. So the pride that the students had in this new building, which was at its time and for its time a profoundly impressive structure. And to speak to that, right, the importance of the structure, they really got a ringer for the dedication. Dr. Simon Newcomb, who, in addition to his chair of mathematics and astronomy at the illustrious Johns Hopkins, had also been the chief astronomer for the U.S. Naval Observatory down in Annapolis. And he is a name that most people do not know today. And I got to tell you, as I was doing the research on it, this is one of these things that makes you feel endlessly stupid, whether it's quantum mechanics or string theory, or trying to figure out what the planetary motion tables are and the ephemerides that he was well known for. To this day, the work that he did on planetary motion is still the standard by which these things are measured. So this is a genius of a brain. And he comes and he gives a talk called The Place of Astronomy in the Sciences. And he actually has this, he sort of has this funny line, as the newspaper said. He says, don't worry about the humble nature of our little building. Sometimes the biggest work is done in the smallest of spaces. And apparently, according to the Syracuse Herald, he got quite a laugh on that. But he really goes on in that speech to praise the nature of curiosity. He ties himself to the grand noble army of astronomers, and he goes all the way back, to Copernicus and back to Galileo, and even back to the ancient Greeks themselves, who had stood and looked at the stars and had wondered what was up there. He really looks to education as the key, because he recognizes that the cosmos and the universe are always going to be giving up their secrets, but it takes a trained professional to get them, to find them, to discern them. And this is why an object like a telescope is so important to Newcomb. He talks a lot about Isaac Newton and his work in cosmology. And it really is, honestly, even for a smooth brain like me, I was actually amazed at how accessible the speech was as you read through the 15 pages of it. But really harping on education, harping on the need for people to understand how the planets work and how the universe works and what role people have sort of in the cosmos. Interestingly enough, as brilliant as he was, he actually sort of is known in scientific circles in the wake of the Wright brothers' defeat of gravity in 1903. Newcomb pens a famous paper in 1901, basically saying there's no way that we'll ever invent a flying machine. He says it's completely impractical and it can't happen. And so apparently some scientists have rediscovered this, and they're giving out an award called the Simon Newcomb Award, the Dr. Simon Newcomb Award, that is sort of calling people out for having the most ridiculous arguments against why artificial intelligence was never going to happen. So this happened to face. So again, a mixed bag, but sort of funny to think about. He had to really eat a crow, as they say, once Orville and Wilbur got to it down in the Outer Banks of North Carolina. But nonetheless, he is a profoundly significant individual when we talk about astronomy and we talk about planetary motion, we talk about physics. And so the fact that he was here in Syracuse giving that talk really was a testament to how important he was, how important the Holden Observatory was to the furthering of the science of astronomy, and really to the status of Syracuse University, which at that point is still a very small religious institution that is really trying to find its footing amongst the academies of the day. Now, as I mentioned, one of the coolest things I found during the research for this project was the pride with which the Syracuse students had in this building, because I sort of laughed. Again, I'm happy to say, or I'm not happy, maybe I'm more embarrassed these days to say that as a student out there, you walk by Holden Observatory, I don't know, hundreds of times. My office was in Eggers Hall, and I taught in the law school a lot when it was over there in the White Building. And I walked by this building 100 times, I had no idea. But back in 1888, they were all about it. I don't know if you're going to be able to read this, but this is from the 1888 Onondaga, which used to be the yearbook that the Syracuse University gave out for quite a long time. And this is actually a write-up on it. And they mention in it just how really proud they are and what it means to their university, and the idea of progress and what this building means to the progress. I have a feeling they were also very loving about it because they got the day off Although you got to imagine how cold it was in December of 1888 up on the hill, 1887 up on the hill, standing outside while they were observing this. But nonetheless, again, a really, really proud moment for Syracuse University. And this is actually a drawing of the observatory from the other page in the 1888 yearbook. Looks a little bit like the structure that we get, but of course, this was before Russell had actually finished his drawings and started it. And of course, they turned out to see their professor, because a lot of these students would have had Russell as a professor while they were in the School of Fine Arts. So I love that little tidbit. Now, you'll have to I apologize for the quality of this image, but it's not me, I promise. This is one of the earliest images taken of the building on a glass plate negative. You can see the hall languages. You can see the beginnings of Onondaga in the middle, but you can really hardly make it out. And there is a shot of the Holden Observatory. This is taken 1880 88 roughly. It's set on the back 1888, 1889. So they're in the middle of construction on the Von Ranke library as well when they've got this going on. But again, not the greatest quality, but when I found it in the folder, I was very, very pleased to see it. So I'll leave it up for a second so you can take a look at it. That's a very, very old photograph that had been printed out. The negative is actually in the collection. It's a beautiful glass plate. But again, what a lonely campus this was, right? When we're up there. I mean, considering what we see when we walk around it now, and again, to give you a sense of the way the university's grounds have changed and really, I mean, what was going on. This is in 1888, roughly. Again, the Von Ranke Library is in construction. Actually, what's funny about this photograph is that the photograph you had just seen, the guy in the bowler hat here in the corner is the photographer that took this picture. So this is like a selfie 1888 style, right? You got to love that. So here you go. I mean, rows of dirt. There's still fences up there on the old Comstock plot. This is obviously a far cry from the campus we all know and would recognize. But again, it's the second building. It's the oldest building on campus. So you can imagine as a student on campus how excited you're going to be now that there's another building and there's another building. And not only is it a building, but it's a building with an amazing world-class telescope that you can go in and look at the stars. Now, as I mentioned, Mr. Holden does not hold back. Sorry for that pun. I'll sew myself out when I'm finished. Doesn't hold back on the funding, and they splurge for what is one of the finer telescopes in the country, made by Alvin Clark and Sons out of Cambridge, Massachusetts. It's an 8-inch refracting telescope, and that's the lens that uses it. So for its time, it was incredibly powerful, and it could take images. It had a comet chaser, it had a chronometer, it had a chronometer, so you could look at light and you could sort of gauge distances. One of the things that Newcomb was actually known for was his recalculation of the speed of light. So he was really interested in these sorts of tools that were in this. And what you're looking at here is a shot from the 1940s. And here on your right, obviously, a color. This is a more modernized picture, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But again, to give you a sense of what the telescope looks like, since most of us, I venture to guess, have not been inside this building before. Here's a really great shot of the Clark telescope, and what I really love about it is you can see, obviously, the gold in it, the quality of it, and there is the year, right, of it being constructed in looking out with the moon in the distance. A spectacular shot from actually the Holden Observatory. Has its own Facebook page, and that's on there. So get on there and smash that like and subscribe button. But again, some of the finest observatory that was anywhere in the country. This is the same telescope that was at the Naval Observatory. This is the same telescope that was at the Harvard Observatory. I mean, you name it, the Clark telescope was it. And so again, this is another sort of feather in the cap, not only of the university, but of Chancellor Sims, and certainly of Mr. Holden, who paid to have it come in. Now, I mentioned I'm not an astronomer, but a lot of us have been sort of obsessed with astronomy the last couple of weeks with all of the talk about the eclipse, which, of course, if anyone was in central New York, we didn't really get to see it very much because good old central New York clouds. But I'm sure there was a crowd in Holden checking it out. But one of the coolest things that had happened during the career of this telescope, when it was still sort of at the cutting edge, was in 1910, it got this amazing picture of one of the most famous celestial bodies ever. And I, as a child of the 1980s, and a big fan of the band Fish, of course, love Halley's Comet. Halley's Comet came back in 1986, and I remember as a young 5-year-old sort of being obsessed with it all. This is actually a photograph from the negative taken from that comet chaser in Holden Observatory. So you got to imagine when this thing is published in 1910, it is a spectacular image. And of course, it spurs curiosity, not only in Syracuse, but throughout upstate New York, because it really is one of the more powerful telescopes in upstate New York, for decades of its period. So you've got this amazing shot of Halley's Comet, which actually makes the rounds in quite a few journals and newspapers in 1910. So this is a really, again, this is a tremendous get, if you will, for the physics department at Syracuse University, who the astronomy department, the astronomy section of the physics department is always sort of a smaller section of the physics department, particularly back in these days when a lot of really revolutionary work was being done over in the L.C. Smith building where the physics department was really housed, and working on dynamos and electric motors and trying to harness electricity and all kinds of diodes. I mean, really visionary things. And eventually in radar and stuff, all being done by Syracuse Physics Department. But there was always a very healthy astronomy department there. And really that is part and parcel because of the tools that were available to those students and faculty. And here is another phenomenal shot of the moon, taken from Holden sometime circa 1920. Again, we sort of take this stuff for granted. You can get on and just see the moon. And now of course, we know we've been there. But I imagine when I saw this photograph in the collection, any of you that are familiar with early cinema, there's a movie by a French director, and it's based on the Jules Verne novel, all right, going to the moon, right, a trip to the moon, and you've got this idea that they didn't let the man with cheese, and they don't know what's up there. And if you watch that movie, they think there's aliens up there and there's all kinds of life forms there. And of course, we know that there are not. But back when they got this shot, imagine, much like the Halley's Comet shot, the sort of heads exploding of the clarity, right? To actually see the surface of the moon in 1920, really just incredible. And again, a real testament to how visionary Syracuse University was and really tries to continue to be in all of the study that they are doing there. These are two really good examples of that from our past. Now, sort of the sad story about Holden Observatory is that not much else really is happening there. They don't really hold classes there in the 40s. As Syracuse University undergoes a really massive expansion under Chancellor Tolley, called the GI Bulge. And I love this picture because what you're looking at are actually the temporary housing that they put up basically on the back of the quad. You're looking there across Memorial, to house the thousands of GIs that ended up coming to Syracuse in the wake of the Second World War. In fact, one of the last sort of stupendous things to happen in Holden was right on the brink of the beginning of the Second World War in 1939. Mars actually came really, really close to Earth, and I found a contemporary account of students being lined up outside Holden to try and get a view of the red planet. And I guess some of them did. But really, beyond that, much like it was for us that were at SU, it was just sort of a curious building. I was somebody that was on before, and I'll forget his name, that was on before we went live. I used a hilarious term that made me chuckle. It was sort of a glorified custodian shed, as far as everybody knew. And that sort of made me laugh because nobody really knew what was going on in there. And so for most students, as they're walking by, it's just sort of there. And it's a strange curiosity. And by the middle of the 1950s, it's starting to show signs of wear. I mean, remember, it's constructed in 1887. Even though it's built of Onondaga limestone, some of the gears in the tower and the turret that would move the telescope are going. It's showing signs of its age. Now, one of the great sort of ironies of this is actually in 1958, a gentleman who I'm going to mention later, but by the name of Story Musgrave, graduates from Syracuse University with a bachelor's degree in mathematics. And he will go on to have a career that I will talk about in a few minutes. But so you've got this juxtaposition again of somebody like Musgrave there studying it, obsessed with astronomy, and obviously has this. He talks about in some interviews that I saw. He has these great memories of Holden because he sort of knew what was there, but otherwise it's sort of a hidden gem. But again, the 50s go by, the 60s go by, the 70s go by. It's just there, not really much doing anything. It's used for some classes. Of course, the astronomers that are on campus are using it. But Syracuse University continues to grow by leaps and bounds, adding thousands of students every single year. Finally, by 1990, campus has grown too big, and it's time to build Eggers Hall, which was my home for many years on Syracuse University's campus. And Holden has got to go. It's got to move. There had been talk of actually demolishing the structure, as there had been, and I mentioned this during my Hall of Languages talk, there had been talk in the 50s and in the 60s of demolishing the Hall of Languages as well, which I shudder to think, and I get like sort of upset when I even say it out loud. I cannot imagine campus, certainly without the Hall of Languages, but even without Holden Observatory. So the idea comes along that we're going to move it about 250 feet. So from where it used to be on Science Hill, it's going to be moved by a company out of Shenango, and they move it about 250 feet. They move it about 190 feet west, and then they move it about 60 feet south, closer to the carrier. Check that JMA wireless dome. I get fined every time I use the wrong word for that one. And there it is, and they move it. Now, when they move it, there is some discussion of, and this is a much better picture. I love this shot. You can already get a sense of what it was. There's a great quote from a newspaper source there of, I think it was the director of grounds and operations at SU 91, saying that she expected a crowd as big as an NCAA tournament to turn up to see this 390-ton building moved that 250 feet. I imagine quite a few folks turned out in the spring to check it out. Lots of students, I'm sure, used it as a good excuse to get out of a class every once in a while, you know, like they like to do, and to check it out, to move it. But again, they just moved it. There was no renovation whatsoever at that particular point. They just move it, they shore it up, and it will continue to sit where it is now, out that back entrance to Krause College. And really, it wasn't even open for the most part to the public or to students for many of these decades. You had to have either a class that would have been in there, or you had to get special permission to go in. And even then, from what I understand, it was not really done very often. It was just, again, sort of there, and the ivy began to grow up and around it. Now, this all changes, luckily for everybody on campus, in the late 2010s. And that, of course, is Chancellor Severud, and there is Dr. Marvin Druger, the man who is really responsible for the renaissance of the Holden Observatory. And in this great sort of poetic coincidence, much like Erastus Holden and the birth of the observatory, right? It comes from tremendous tragedy and great loss. Dr. Druger is actually emeritus faculty at Syracuse in the biology department. He taught upwards, to his count, probably 50,000 students, he said, over the course of his plus 50-year career in the biology department. He loved everything about Syracuse University, obviously, and his wife, Pat, who actually worked with him in the biology department, they were married for 56 years. She was a great lover of the sciences, and she was a great lover of astronomy. And they always looked at Holden as this sort of untapped resource, right? And they were always sort of thinking, like, let's, you know, bring it back, obviously, right? I mean, Professor Druger is obviously on campus all the time. He's a scientist, that curiosity, the scientific mind. And they talk about, you know, getting it back online, making it a usable space again, for faculty and for the student body. And really, that's what ends up happening. Discussions start in 2013, and then eventually Professor Druger commits to a gift in 2015 in honor of his wife, Pam, who has at that point passed away, sadly, from cancer. So much like, again, Erastus Holden had put the money forward and built this building to sort of grieve and memorialize his son, Charles. Here you see Professor Druger doing the same thing for his wife, Pam. And again, you know, I was thinking about it as I was talking, as I was doing the research, thinking about them sort of looking to the heavens, right? And you know, whether heaven is celestial, or whether it's religious, or whatever it might mean to you, or what it meant to them, this idea of looking to the heavens, right? Looking to something that is infinite and continues, and putting a legacy here on Earth that can help you know, push knowledge forward, which is something that the Drugers obviously committed themselves to doing during their lifetimes. And this is their daughter. And I'm not sure who this gentleman is. Someone maybe could point it out to me in the comments after. But there is Patricia in the picture behind. There's Professor Druger there, and there is their daughter, of course, Chancellor Severud. And it meant so much to the Drugers to get this project up and running. And of course, now the Astronomy Learning Center on the first floor is where classrooms have it. There are public tours now. Of course, students go in to Holden, and that really is, of course, again, a testament to the generosity and the curiosity of the Druger family. Now, I love this story is what's incredible about this. As I mentioned Story Musgrave earlier, Musgrave is on campus in the 50s studying mathematics. He's obviously a brilliant guy. He becomes an astronaut. And his career as an astronaut for NASA is really one of the more impressive in the history of that organization. Again, as you can see, he's one of the only men or women to fly all 5 space shuttles, right? And so perfectly, right? He is actually part in 1993 of the first, and you're looking at the picture here actually of him on the Hubble telescope, right? Amazing. He's part of the mission, the first mission to service the Hubble telescope in 1993. So that is literally him skywalking on a spacewalking. I must have Star Wars on the brain. He's out on the Hubble telescope fixing it. So, I mean, what better person, right, to come back to Syracuse for the dedication and to talk about his career, his love of astronomy, his love of Syracuse. And so he actually comes back and he becomes great friends with Dr. Druger after they had met at a dinner years ago. And obviously they become, again, fast friends. And so Dr. Druger could think of nobody better to come back and to talk and really, again, sell the passion, right? I mean, what it meant to them, what Syracuse University meant to them, what Holden Observatory meant to his career, and obviously what telescopes, mean to the furthering of scientific knowledge and the advancement of the human species in and of itself, understanding space. But again, what a resume, 6 spacewalks. And again, an SU guy through and through. I mean, so between Story Musgrave and Eileen Collins, SU has pretty fantastic credentials when it comes to space. And again, whether that's directly tied to a Holden Observatory or not, it really is something that I think that university and us as alumni should really be proud of the tremendous impact that SU has had on the human knowledge that it revolves around space. So really, really incredible stuff. Here is a shot of Professor Duncan Brown in the physics department. Using the space, right? This shot had to make Dr. Musgrave incredibly happy. Look at the joy on the face of the people in the first floor of the observatory. And I imagine Professor Brown must love that he gets to go in there. I mean, he probably was in there anyway. But the fact that they can get to go in. Now, again, it's important to note that it's the original Alvin Clark telescope, right? So it's not like they went in and transformed it. It is, in many respects, now itself an artifact. So it's sort of like traveling back in time, which of course Dr. Newcomb said was impossible, much like traveling in a flying machine. We'll see. Maybe someday someone will prove him wrong on going back in time as well. But when you go into that space, I look forward to doing so. And certainly Jeff, who's been in there, Mr. Baspel can certainly tell us what it feels. I imagine it must feel like you're stepping back in time to a certain degree. And it's still a wonderfully functioning tool for astronomy. And like I said, I'm sure it was very busy when the eclipse was here, but it is still from the 1880s. And so it has sort of been left behind. But it's a real testament to the university's leadership and certainly Chancellor Severud, and again to the Druger family, that it is now once again a functioning place where students and people from Syracuse, the community, can come and learn and take in the cosmos in a way that we have been doing as humans forever. This is a phenomenal shot that I'm going to end on, sort of as if the heavens were speaking to us there from the sun as it beams out over the second oldest building on Syracuse University campus. So now hopefully when you come back for homecoming, if you haven't been in, now you know a little bit more about this magnificent structure on our campus, and hopefully it means a little bit more to you. I know it certainly means a little bit more to me after that. Thank you so much for attending, and I will try to answer any questions that you may have about the structure or about the talk or about anything really. I'm really appreciative of the invitation, and I really want to thank Jeff for coming in for the introduction, and for all of you for attending. I really appreciate it, and look forward to seeing you again. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Bob. That was really a fascinating presentation. I have one element to add to your comments on Story Musgrave. The university has an organization through the athletic department called the Syracuse University Varsity Club, one of the oldest letter winner clubs in the country, going back to about 1932, founded by Mr. King of a local law firm, Bond, Schoeneck and King. And Story Musgrave was an athlete at Syracuse. I'm sorry I can't tell you what sport, but he was a recipient of as a letter winner of distinction a number of years ago. And just a point of reference, so an athlete as well as an astronomer.
Incredible.
So with that, I'd like to now open this event for questions. Liz Cole of the College of Arts and Sciences staff is going to help us. So please either raise your hand and we will call on you, or enter your question in the chat box and we'll read it to our presenters. So with that, we're open for questions.
Yeah, if anybody wants to put a question in, there are a few comments in the chat. Marin mentioned in the 70s, I was in there, invited by my astronomy professor. So that's nice. It's a beautiful space.
I think
Frank-
the comment here from Frank Slazer
Mhm.
is referring to the picture with Marvin Druger and Story and a gentleman that looks like Story Musgrave, and I think that is Story Musgrave. Yes,
Oh,
right there, and that's Dean Karen Ruland, our immediate past dean of the College of Arts and Sciences.
spectacular. I could not find identification for that photograph anywhere. So thank you.
Yep.
Frank has another question later on down the chat. How often is Holden open to the public and students not in the astronomy program? And Bob, if you don't know, I do.
I do not know. So I would love to know because I want to go in there.
Yeah, so you can always reach out directly to the physics department to set up an outside tour. I don't think they have office hours per se, but they're always willing to offer a tour if someone is interested. And then as Bob mentioned, we do have times during the year, specifically at homecoming, if you come back to campus, that we open it to attendees on campus that weekend. Toby asks, very informative. Is there a recording about the Hall of Languages? And I can answer that as well. There is, and I will put the link in the chat. And this has not only this conversation about the Hall of Languages, but also our past events as well in this series.
I'll pose a question. If you know, how does Holden compare to other university observatories? Is it one of the oldest, one of the youngest? And do many universities have observatories these days, as so many telescopes are built away from cities and lights?
It is actually, Jeff. It's one of the oldest ones on any campus in the U.S., and that really is again a testament to the visionary nature of them building it. As I mentioned, there was one at Harvard, there's one at the Naval Observatory, but other than that, on a college campus, there really were not anything like this, which is why it was such a significant build. And why even in the scientific literature of the 1880s and the 1890s, it was something that was talked about regularly. And when you think about the topography, before, I mean, this is right on the verge of electricity, right? I mean, this is before they build this thing before electricity really comes online. So that beautiful hill that it's on, pointed to the sky, would have been a phenomenal place to look at the stars. And even still, I mean, Syracuse luckily is not as big and light heavy as it could be. But I would venture to guess that even today, the light pollution would be minimal, and the vantage point up on the hill really lends itself to a great view.
Mr. Slazer has a really interesting comment or question, which is Holden on the National Register of Historic Places? And I think the answer is no, but what a wonderful potential opportunity. You would think, given its age and its uniqueness, that there's an opportunity there.
It is on a historic building register, but it is wrapped into the larger. I mean, that entire portion of Syracuse University's campus is actually on the National Register.
Interesting.
So the original Comstock Tract, as it was called, all of those buildings, that entire is all on the National Register. So it doesn't need an individual listing.
I'll go while we're getting some more questions posted. Are there other buildings on campus that utilize the limestone that Holden is made up of? You may have commented partially on that earlier.
I did, yeah, the Hall of Languages. So
Right.
you know, the next time you're on campus, the Hall of Languages blocks were faced, so it's harder to see the fossils in them. But there are lots of places now because that building has been obviously weathered for 150 years, where you can really see. And again, my wife is a biologist, a PhD in biology. You've got crinoids, you got trilobites, you've got coral in there, brachiopods, 300 to 400 million years old. I mean, it's really, really something. In fact, the Syracuse City Hall, which is right down the street from me, during walking tours that I give, is made of the same rock. And I often joke that people see me rubbing the building and they think I'm on drugs, but I'm really just looking at the fossils. It's amazing stuff.
How about Steel Hall, Bob?
Steel Hall is, I believe, it's certainly limestone. I don't know if it's Onondaga, Jeff. I would not be surprised considering its age. I mean, you got to imagine, in terms of building materials, they were coring it right down on the nation, so it would have been the cheapest. It would have been the easiest, and there was still a huge stone quarry and a work right on the south side, sort of kitty corner to where the steam plant is. So I would venture to guess that Steel Hall certainly, it looks like Onondaga limestone to me. Now that I know what Onondaga limestone is, I'm sort of an amateur geologist in that regard. So I would not be surprised, but I can't say definitively if it is. But if I was a betting man, I'd say it's. I'd say it is.
Does anybody else have any questions? Feel free to open your mic and pose a question, and we'll do our best to respond. There being none, Bob, I want to thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. That was, as I said, a fantastic discussion. So happy we had the chance to learn from you today about the Holden telescope. And thank you all for joining us today. This is the last Alumni Academy for the semester, but we'll be having more events this fall. Stay tuned for more invitations to future presentations. We hope to see you again soon. I'm going to now ask Liz to close the Zoom meeting, and have a great rest of your day and a wonderful summer.